On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the escalating conflict between the US and Iran, as well as North Korea's diplomatic engagements. Do stay with us. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Press Perspective for this Monday, July 20th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. From escalating tensions between the US and Iran to North Korea's deepening ties with Russia and China, the global security landscape is becoming increasingly complex. For more on this reality and its broad implications, I have Celio Fioretti with French daily Croix here in the studio. Celio, welcome back.
Glad to be back. It's been a while.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun Jin at Kyung Hee University joining us virtually. Professor Choi, it's great to have you with us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Celia, we start here in the studio. Let's begin with the latest events in the military confrontation between the US and Iran.
Well, it's a never-ending war, and the conflict has entered a new dangerous phase. Over the weekend, the U.S. carried out another wave of airstrike on Iran, saying that they were aimed at punishing the Revolutionary Guard after Iranian attack killed 2 American service members in Jordan. Those were the first confirmed U.S. military deaths since the latest round of fighting began, bringing the total number of American casualties to 16 since the beginning of the conflict in February. Iran also responded immediately. It says it launched drone strikes against 2 U.S. military bases in Kuwait, targeting ammunition depot and Patriot missile system and radar system. Tehran also claimed to have attacked American position in Bahrain and Jordan, showing that the conflict is really spreading across the region, as it was at the beginning with airstrike on several airports. And at the political level, the situation also appears to be deteriorating. A preliminary ceasefire agreement has reportedly collapsed, largely because of the dispute over the Strait of Hormuz being closed. And both sides are also using a relatively aggressive rhetoric. Iran new supreme leader has promised what he called an unforgettable lesson to the U.S., while senior Iranian commanders also warned of further large-scale attack and retaliation if American strikes continue. So for now, there's really no sign of de-escalation, and concerns are growing about a potential spread of the conflict to regional countries.
Right, indeed. And given these latest events, Professor Choi, do you believe diplomacy remains a viable option?
Yes, as Celio just noted, the situation is getting worse. This makes diplomatic solution much more difficult. But nevertheless, I still believe diplomacy is the only realistic option to end this war. But the deaths of American soldiers by Iranian attack will surely put more pressure on the American government. So we may see more military action in the coming days. But if we look at what has happened in the recent months, I don't think military force alone can solve all of this problem. Iran has continued to fight back despite the repeated attack by America and Israel. And also the Iranian regime has stayed in power even after losing several of the top military and the political leaders, including the former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. We have also not seen the large-scale anti-government protests in Iran, although some people expect it. So this tells us something about Iran, and this is very important. It is possible maybe to damage Iran's military, but it is much harder to compel the Iranian regime to back down. I don't think Iran wants a full-scale war or ground war with the United States, because the cost of this full-scale war would be simply too high for the United States and also Iran as well. So that's why I expect military pressure is not a simple solution for this war, although there will be some military action will continue for some time. But in the end, military alone will not bring peace. The only way to end this war is through direct talk and a political agreement between the two countries.
Right, of course. At the table, of course, then. Celio, against the backdrop of this fresh fighting between the two countries, quite a number of observers have been looking into who potentially wins from a prolonged war. What have you been hearing on the ground?
Well, economically speaking, there are clear winners and losers. Also, it's important to stress that no one is really winning in case of a war. The biggest winners, at least in short terms, are energy exporters outside the Gulf, which is, for example, countries like Norway, Canada, or Russia. And they stand more benefit because of higher oil and gas prices, which makes their exports more valuable. But perhaps the biggest beneficiary in the war right now is Russia. As global markets scramble for alternative source of gas and oil, Russian crude exports, particularly to India, for example, have increased significantly, potentially bringing Moscow billions of dollars in additional revenue while it's still at war with Ukraine. And on the other hand, countries more exposed to risk are major energy importers. Europe, the UK, and much of Asia, especially South Korea, are quite vulnerable because of rising gas prices, which feed inflation and transport costs and household energy bills. South Korea, as I said, is partly exposed because around 70% of its oil comes from the Middle East. They're also concerned that disruption could also affect maybe a bigger share of the economy, with a lot of industry relying on crude oil import. Even the US is losing on the economical side, with oil producers not having higher prices, but US consumers are importing a lot of energy and consuming a lot of energy. So that's also a bigger issue. But for the US, I think they lose more on the political side. The more the war drags on, the more complicated it gets to justify it to the American voters, especially with the midterms coming soon. So the Trump administration will face a big cost on a big political cost as long as the war drags on.
Right, indeed. Professor Choi, as Celio mentioned, South Korea secures most of its energy supplies through the disputed Strait of Hormuz. That being said, what options do you propose for this country?
Yeah, this is a very difficult situation. First of all, I think South Korea should see this crisis as more than an energy problem. I think this is also a security problem for South Korea. So we are getting most of our crude oil, about 65 to 70%, through the Strait of Hormuz. So any conflict or instability in this region can quickly raise oil price and shipping costs for South Korea. It can also raise the price in South Korea in general and also affect people's daily lives. So in the short term, we must make sure that South Korea has enough energy. And therefore, it is important to work closely with the United States and also other Arab countries to open the sea lanes in the Middle East, especially the Strait of Hormuz. Although I know right now it is very, very challenging and difficult. And therefore, I think the bigger lesson is about the future. So we should not depend too much on one route or one region. We should buy energy from more countries and build a safer supply system. This is not only about crude oil, but this is also about natural gas and shipping lane. So South Korea should also keep investing in clean energy, therefore renewable energy, and the nuclear power as well. The goal is not to stop buying energy from the Middle East right away, but it is to reduce the risk step by step. So this crisis in the Middle East, in the Strait of Hormuz, also show that energy and national security are now closely interrelated. So in the past, we often saw energy mainly as an economic issue, but today it is also a security issue. A war far away from the Korean Peninsula can now directly hurt Korean economy and possibly security. So my point is simple. We must deal with today's crisis by working closely with the United States and other Arab countries. But South Korea must also get ready for the next one, possible future conflict in our own region or in the Middle East. A stronger energy system with more supplier and more routes is the best way to protect South Korea in the long term.
Right, indeed, diversification. And speaking about our region, Celio, let's turn to diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has been actively promoting its foreign policy with its key partners, namely China and Russia. Could you walk us through some of the engagements in recent days?
Exactly, there has been definitely a noticeable uptick in high-level diplomacy between North Korea and China, for example, over the past few weeks. Just recently, a senior Chinese leader, Wang Huning, visited Pyongyang, where he met both Kim Jong-un and Jo Yong-won, one of North Korea's most powerful party official. That came only days after North Korean Premier Park Tae-sung traveled to Beijing also for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. All of this also followed Xi Jinping coming to Pyongyang last month, his first in 7 years. Officially, these exchanges are marking the 65th anniversary of the China and North Korea Treaty of Friendship, but the scale and frequencies of those visits suggest there's maybe something much more going on between the two countries. Both sides are emphasizing closer strategic coordination, and at a time where regional tensions are rising, and the international landscape, as you mentioned, is becoming more complex and increasingly polarized. What's particularly striking right now is the China messaging. In the past, Beijing usually was showing friendship to North Korea, but also at the same time mentioning denuclearization as an objective. That reference essentially disappeared of recent communication. Instead, Chinese officials are focusing on increasing common goals and defending shared ideas between the two countries, which means that maybe Beijing is becoming closer to accept North Korea as a de facto nuclear state. The shift also reflects broader geopolitical dynamics. North Korea has deepened its military partnership with Russia, and actually Foreign Minister was en route to Moscow over the weekend. And China also appears to reinforce its influence over North Korea. Both countries want to maintain, Russia and China both want to maintain influence over their neighbor, to maybe present a more united front against the U.S. and especially strategic cooperation between the U.S., South Korea and Japan. So we clearly see both sides really aligning to have a stronger front on the region, which of course will increase tension.
Right. Professor Choi, I wonder, how significant is this renewed high-level engagement between North Korea and China, and that between North Korea and Russia?
I think this is a very important development. So North Korea and China and also Russia are not simply holding more meeting. I think they are sending a clear message that they want to cooperate more closely together for their security. I think North Korea needs China's economic aid and also political support. China also wants to keep its influence over North Korea and also maintain balance of power on the Korean Peninsula. And also North Korea and Russia have cooperated closely in its ongoing war between the Ukraine and Russia as well. But the wider international situation is also important. As Celio just noted, now the international politics surrounding East Asia is very polarized. So Trump administration has taken a much harder approach toward its rival country. So competition between the United States and China is also becoming stronger in South China Sea and also in the Strait of Taiwan. So we have also seen American military actions in Venezuela and Iran. So these kind of events have increased fear in Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang that the U.S. may use military force more often, possibly in East Asia. And as a result, I think North Korea, China, and Russia have now stronger reason to support one another. And that's why I believe international politics in East Asia is widely polarized. Because these three countries, North Korea, China, and Russia, and they share concern about American pressure and stronger military tie between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo, and perhaps closer cooperation between South Korea and NATO as well. So this renewed contact between North Korea, China, and Russia is not only about their bilateral relationship. It is a part of a wider move toward closer cooperation among North Korea, China, and Russia. I think this is not simply about their friendship. I think this is their strategic response to growing pressure from Washington and a conflict in the international system today.
Right, and speaking about pressure from Washington, top military leaders from Seoul, Washington and Tokyo, they recently reaffirmed their cooperation against North Korea's nuclear weapons. Could you tell us a bit about this reaffirmation and, of course, its broader implications?
Well, that was an expected pledge, but that meeting in Washington was more about demonstrating that trilateral security cooperation remains strong despite political change in all three countries. The top military chief from South Korea, United States and Japan reaffirmed that commitment to working together to counter North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities. Concretely, they pledged that they want to continue joint military exercises, including the annual Freedom Edge drill, which cover multiple domains such as land, sea, air, cyber, and space. They also agreed to strengthen intelligence sharing among the three countries to improve military interoperability and expand high-level exchanges between their armed forces. The broader implication is that these three countries are trying to institutionalize their cooperation so that it becomes less dependent on changes of government. That's particularly significant because relationship between South Korea and Japan are fluctuating depending on who's in the White House or in the Blue House or in Japan, in Tokyo. So by creating regular military exercises and cooperation, routine coordination, they're building a more durable security framework between the three allies. Of course, North Korea sees things very differently. Pyongyang has once again condemned these exercises as rehearsal for an invasion or an aggression of their countries. That closer cooperation between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo justify for North Korea their increase of spending in their armament. So from the allies' perspective, from Washington, for example, this is more about being ready in case of a problem in the region. But from North Korea, it reinforces the narrative that they always use, that they're surrounded by enemies, and that will justify their aggression, maybe. So this is a good sign. The cooperation is a good sign for South Korea, Japan, and Washington, but it can also fuel tension because North Korea is using it as a tool to justify its weapon program.
Right, and staying on the Korean Peninsula, Professor Choi, is there any realistic path to renewed dialogue between the two Koreas, do you think?
At the moment, frankly speaking, I don't think there is many chances for renewed dialogue between the two Korea. The biggest problem is that the current international environment is making dialogue very difficult. As I said earlier, now we are living in a very polarized world. And also, there is a problem of international sanction on North Korea. So because of the UN Security Council sanction, there is a very little chance for economic cooperation or tourism between North and South Korea. And in addition, the military communication has been cut off for a long time. And right now, almost all official channels for dialogue have stopped working as well. So at the same time, the North Korea has become much closer to both China and Russia, as I told already. From Pyongyang's point of view, right now, North Korea in a stronger strategic position from Pyongyang's point of view, okay? So they believe they now have a stronger security tie with Moscow and Beijing, partly thanks to because of its participation in the Ukraine war. And for this reason, North Korea has no strong reason to restart talk with South Korea. And another challenge is that the trust between the two Korea is now very low. So even if both governments want to meet tomorrow, there are almost no official channels for dialogue anymore. But however, in the world of diplomacy, the change is always possible. And therefore, this does not mean dialogue is impossible. The history shows that the situation on the Korean Peninsula can change very quickly. And therefore, if the security environment improves or the political situation changes, and there could be some opportunities for dialogue as well. But for now, the first step is not a summit or major agreement between the two governments. The first step is simply restoring communication. So without communication, it is very difficult to rebuild the trust between the two Korea, and without trust, meaningful dialogue is also impossible.
Right, indeed. Those are the thoughts of Professor Choi Hyun Jin with regard to prospects of dialogue here on the Korean Peninsula. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Professor Choi, as always, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Celio here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that's all for this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.